Here with a hands-on preview for the Druid. We'll take a look at the shape-shifting
Preview for the Druid. Hands in the preview for the Druid.
forms, Druid spells, and how the new class plays overall in the early campaign. I got a chance to record this when I went to the studio to host the Q&A, thanks to Grinding Gear Games for covering my flights to do so. Keep in mind that as this was recorded more than a week from launch, it's non-final and stuff can and already has changed from what you'll see here. The new Druid archetype is flavoured by the combination of elemental and nature magic combined with shape-shifting into various beast forms. It does the rare and challenging action RPG task of giving us the beast forms.
Legenda. Legenda. Traduzir. Português.
Of elemental.
Agora, isso aqui é no ato 1, terceira zona. Esse maluco de algum jeito tem 5 skills.
And nature magic.
Mas o que me chama mais atenção é que o tamanho desse slam tá bem grande, velho. Nossa, velho. Então significa que a nossa build vai ficar mais
Combined with
braba do que eu pensei,
shifting into various beast forms.
O tamanho
It does
desse slam
the
tá muito
rare
grande,
and
velho.
challenging action RPG
Significa que ele não pegou área de efeito.
task of giving us the potential forms. It does the rare and challenging action RPG.
Não tem área de efeito aqui. Não tem joia, não tem nada, mano. Nossa, eu vou botar esse urso pra quebrar a tela toda fácil, velho. Ele roubou, tá overlevel com a arma cheatada. Ah, com certeza, velho. Tô vendo, ele tá com 6 skills aqui. Qual pob você tava seguindo ontem pro War? É um pob meu, eu fiz o pob, o Pronelis. Porque eu não sei se eu ia de Druida ou de Warrior.
Task of giving us the potential to play a hybrid of spells and attacks. The human form is where your spellcasting happens, and your beast forms are where your melee happens.
Not natural, this.
Vamos ver.
Air
Lightning
gone
Bolt.
sour.
When you start on the beach, this is brought home when you immediately find a staff with Lightning Bolt to begin spellcasting. However, that is quickly followed by looting the new melee weapon type, a Talisman. Talismans function just like any other melee weapon in terms of where your damage comes from. They scale just like a mace would, for example.
10,16 de Fizz, 1.25 de ataque por segundo e 8 de crit. É forte até.
Increase physical damage and attack speed.
É forte, mano.
But unique to Talismans, they give you the ability to select a shapeshift form using this UI element. Werewolf and
compara
Bear
com o
form is what you have
Henry, ele é forte.
initially, with Wyvern unlocking a little bit later on. This choice doesn't lock you into a form, but rather it just grants you the basic attack of the chosen form. Whenever you use one of these talisman attacks or any other shapeshift ability, you'll automatically shapeshift into that form.
Ou seja, não dá pra você dar shapeshift em duas formas diferentes. Não sei que tu tenha... É, não dá. Tu tem que clicar ali no botãozinho do talismã, mano. Chacal, qual o nome daquela gema de super que dá critical hit chance? Increased crit? Inevitável crit? A não ser que use 2 talismãs. É, a não ser que use 2 talismãs. Pra isso você já marca a skill no talismã, né?
The basic abilities of each form are fairly straightforward, with the potential for a little bit more complexity as you go and unlock other pieces that they can combo with. The Bear's Maul grants rage on hit, while the Werewolf's form, for example, creates exploding chunks of ice on attacking frozen enemies. So they're designed to support or reward the other shapeshift skills that you unlock later on.
Vulcano é a segunda gema.
Familiar
Lembrando que isso é só pro Druida, né? Quem começar de Druida vai passar por isso aqui.
somehow.
Each of the 3 forms also comes with passive effects and mechanics. The version I played was likely non-final in this regard, but for example, Bear had defensive boosts mechanics. The version I played was likely non-final in this regard, but for example, Bear had defensive boosts and generated endurance charges when rage was consumed, while the Werewolf gets a sizable out-of-combat movement speed buff, which you can see in its movement as it
Bear
drops to
tem
all fours.
defensive boost.
You quickly also get your first actual gem on the beach here.
E o Lobo tinha o que ele
Volcano
falou?
drops to all fours. Werewolf gets a sizable out-of-combat movement speed buff, which you can see in its movement as it drops to all
Velocidade de
fours.
movimento fora de
You quickly
combate.
also get your first actual gem on the beach here, Volcano. This is a spell that causes an explosion and spits fire projectiles for a long duration. There's a running theme with a lot of the Druid spells that they provide some sort of ongoing benefit and that they often synergize with things that you can do while shapeshifted. This is all to support that idea of hybrid spells and melee shapeshifting, because after all, if it was something a little bit more limited, like a fireball for example, then you have to make a clear decision between whether you use a fireball or one of the shapeshifted attacks. In this case, you can place spells, they'll continue to do stuff while you're shapeshifted. Perfect. More on Volcano later.
Essa foi a... Ele jogou bem aqui, porque ele já aplicou choque com o bagulho do Lightning Storm, colocou o vulcão e mudou pra forma. Então, tipo, eu suponho que isso daqui é o boost de dano mais alto que você consegue aqui.
With volcanoes and follow up with lightning strikes from the staff if we choose, or with our chosen shapeshift forms melee, which is obviously what I go for.
Começou bem e terminou mal.
Still breathing? That's a start. Sleep now, whatever's left of ye.
The first uncut gem.
Sleep now.
Tá dropando talismã já, ó. Mágico 10, 16, igual que ele
The
pegou,
first
só que
uncut gem
mágico.
expands your options with the Entangle spell, Lunar Assault for Wolf, and Furious Slam for Bear.
Entangle, Lunar Assault, Vulcânico, Furious Slam pro Bear. Então é tudo misturado, na real. É tudo misturado. Lobo com urso, tudo na mesma janela. Furious Slam. É aquela que sai correndo, é a que a gente quer usar. É a que a gente quer usar. 10 de rage.
Test all of them as we go, don't worry, but I decided to kick off with focusing on the Bear's Slam combination first. The Bear's basic attack Maul generates...
Usar o Witch Hunter com 124 pontos de armas, escalando pro lado do monge pra lobo e do warrior pro urso, é GG. Ah, pode ser, mano. Pode ser, faz sentido.
Rage on hit, and Furious Slam spends Rage to empower itself with a more powerful explosion that leaves behind jagged ground. The fact that you're spending Rage also means ground.
Esse daqui é com Rage, ó. Esse foi o Slam com Rage. Esse foi o Slam sem.
The fact that you're spending Rage also means that this constantly maintains endurance charges due to the Bear's passive bonus.
Nesse chat você vai ter 100%
Rage has been simplified
tempo.
across the game, with Rage spenders now more consistently costing 10 Rage, and a new visual effect shows in your character to indicate that you have at least 10 Rage, making you glow, even in shapeshifted forms too.
Aqui ele tá no mínimo com aquele...
You're glowing, you know that you can use a Rage spender. I find the Devourer first up, so we get the first...
Aqui ele tá no mínimo com aquele talismã mágico, né?
Test of our metal a little bit early.
Aye, this reeks of the Devourer's lair.
And here we get to see a bit of the potential power of the Bear styles combos.
You'll not harm another soul.
O ZiggyD joga bem, velho.
So volcanoes spit fire globs at an even pace, but slamming them
muito rápido,
causes an extra set of projectiles to fire. So placing volcanoes on bosses and bear slamming them while generating and spending rage is a simple and chunky feeling combo, and it makes pretty short work of the Devourer here.
Matou bem rápido, mano. Não sei qual que é o talismã mágico que ele tá usando, mas matou bem rápido.
With the first support gem, I grabbed Fist of War to empower the Furious Slam, which plays very smoothly. It's perfect pairing with this. Fist of War to empower the Furious Slam, which plays...
Deixa eu ver se tem mais
with the first
alguma coisa
support
ali.
Gem, I grabbed
Rage Ford, Bramble, Aftershock, Magnificent, não tem nada. É, não tem nada
Fist
diferente.
of War to empower the Furious Slam, which plays very smoothly. It's perfect pairing with this, as you naturally tend to space out the slams anyway as you move around or as you generate rage with Maul. So the double empowered slams that you get from Rage and Fist of War also very satisfying. So pretty happy with that as a first support gem choice for this playstyle. There was some other interesting options there though, such as Overabundance and Burgeon for Volcano. So Overabundance lets you have a max of 2 volcanoes out instead of 1 at the cost of 50% less duration, which I think is a pretty good idea in many cases. Brings them down to something like 4 seconds maybe, but I think that's a very good trade-off because you can slam multiple of them down really fast, get a lot more burst on bosses, and have your slams triggering 2 volcanoes at once. So I run into my first of the League's Val encounters around here. These are just simple sacrifice platforms, basically
guys.
kill monster in circle.
Tem bicho
Thankfully,
aqui,
they aren't
será?
even too strict about you needing to be in the circle.
No,
you just
não tem
kill
bicho.
monster from the circle. So this video is primarily about the Druid. I'm not really going to be focusing too much on the League mechanic here, but I will touch on my very limited experience with it. The basic premise is kill monsters from 6 circles, and then you go raid a ruined temple for loot and a bunch of crafting options to improve your gear as you level. It's fairly unobtrusive as you play through, and then you get the chance to spend a little bit more time in the actual temple to do some gear crafting. That felt pretty powerful. For now though, I get a chance to pick up the Wolf skill, Lunar Assault, and the plant spell Entangle, so I'll test those out in the near future. Entangle first. It places a fissure that grabs nearby enemies to deal rapid small hits of physical spell damage while slowing the entangled foes.
Essa vai em arrow.
Skills like this are always really good for utility, like Oil Grenade, for example, slowing
Não,
enemies is
não,
really
o círculo vai ter uns
Crossbow,
bichos.
like Anticipate,
O círculo vai ter uns
Entangle might
bichos.
feel similar here as a utility spell. And similar to Volcano, it's got that duration lasting benefit design. So it kind of means that regardless of your actual leveling setup, your build, you can throw in some entangles for some extra damage and slowing. I'm immediately pretty impressed with the feeling of bear form for blasting bosses here. Double empowered Volcano Slams is very rewarding. And the hybrid gameplay option on Druid means that if you need to kind of back off for a little while, you're taking a bit too much damage, your flusts are getting run down,
build vai
you
matar
can
boss
give yourself
com
some
hit.
distance and throw down some
Ele tem
volcanoes,
imunidade
entangles, and later on other spells while you're recovering. I'll take the opportunity before we test some wolf form here to comment on the overall feeling of shapeshifting, and it is thankfully
muito forte aqui
seamless.
já.
ZiggyD have done a really good job here of leveraging the weapon swap system, especially after they kind of changed it to not have delays and things like that. And they've done it in a way that requires zero thought on the player's behalf, which I think is really important. We've dumped a bunch of new players on the Druid here, and then you had to like
A pessoa do vídeo,
complicated weapon swap mechanics and set up for the UI. It would be a real problem, but you don't actually have to think about it or do anything initially to use it in its simple form. So spells just naturally swap you to human form and your staff or wand so that you can use them, right? Because they don't necessarily work otherwise. And the shapeshift abilities need the talisman, so they automatically swap to that and thus swap you into your form. There's no real delays here, and it just feels smooth and seamless, even swapping between multiple forms. And the gameplay feels pretty fast too, because that was the thing from the preview that people were concerned about. Especially in War form, it feels very fast. The initial reveal, it did a good thing of like focusing on clear, low damage, low movement examples of mechanics so that you could understand what was going on, but it didn't actually show what it kind of felt or looked like to play the Druid. And it made it look honestly a bit slow and clunky.
So much blood spilled here, the earth still bleeds.
The biggest thing that I noticed playing it, though, that almost
Still bleeds.
Isso aqui é ataque spell, né? Ataque spell, ataque spell, ataque spell. Isso aqui é o que, velho? Não faço ideia do que é isso. Isso aqui deve ser algum bagulho de slow. Isso aqui é área de efeito? Tiraram meu cluster de área de efeito daqui. Será que isso aqui é área de efeito? Isso aqui parece ser alguma coisa de ataque. Ele mostra, chat? Não mostra nada, né? Não faço ideia do que é isso. Nunca vi esse ícone na minha vida. Vocês sabem o que é? Mostra depois.
The biggest thing that I noticed playing it though, that almost right away
Caralho, meu olho tá
Act
coçando muito.
One, it was much faster and smoother than I would have thought from the footage, and that's because you're actually using things like dodge roll and sprint to reposition between attacks. And you obviously have a lot more damage than what they use in those previews. And now onto the Red Veil Zone, I decided to test the early game werewolf style a bit more. Lunar Assault is a large slash melee skill that has a very high freeze rate and cold conversion. And that can be paired with the Ice Bite support to give you a big bonus cold damage buff that's up pretty much all the time with this skill, as it freezes so easily on regular mobs and even fairly easily on most bosses. As a quick aside, I can confirm that you can be
Skill
knocked down
speed.
while sprinting in animal form.
Damage, strength, mais
And I can
skill
confirm that it's
speed,
just as
ok, velho.
hilarious as it normally is. Though this only happened like 2 or 3 times. And I can confirm that it's just as hilarious as it normally is. Though this only happened like
Ah, ele virou duas formas aqui, ó. Não dá pra virar mesmo, então não precisa de dois talismãs
2 or
não,
3
ó.
times. And as a quick aside, I can confirm that you can be knocked down while sprinting in animal form. And I can confirm that it's just as hilarious as it normally is. Though this only happened like 2 or 3 times in the entirety of my playtime. I'm not sure if I'm just getting better at using it or if the shapeshift forms are naturally more resistant to heavy stuns maybe. Either way, it only happened a few times. Anyway, the werewolf doesn't have any immediate synergy with the volcano stuff, but
O problema é
there's
que ele tá
no
no
reason
ato
to
1
not
só,
just
né?
use them anyway.
Então,
Like you
tipo, tu
slap
vai
them
ver
down
ele vai
and then
amassando
go
tudo,
into
porque
melee
ele
and tear them
tá...
apart and you're getting the
Ele vai
bonus
ficar
damage,
muito
right?
forte, que ele tá
And it's all
fechando
scaling
tudo.
kind of just as well as each other at this point in the game. The early combination for Wolf is using the Shred attack on enemies frozen by Lunar Assault. Shred's that basic attack for the werewolf. It's a rapid combination strike with the final hit in 5, I believe, hitting twice. Each hit from Shred on a frozen target chips off a chunk of ice, which then explodes after a decently long delay. The typical approach for rares and bosses is to use Lunar Assault a couple times to freeze them, followed by 1 to 2 full combinations of Shred, with the icicles exploding for some pretty wild burst damage at times, especially on any sort of larger bosses. The icicles do fly backwards behind the target, but on bosses, most of them tend to hit, especially those bigger ones. There's a lot more you can do with the icicles later on, and more combo pieces for the wolf form. It's only just this kind of basic bit here, but it feels
Tá batendo,
fast
velho.
and
Tá batendo
satisfying,
aqui.
and that freeze potency is very high right off the bat. So it's a pretty good early game for the werewolf, I felt. Honestly, for the first half of Act 1, I would say both werewolf and bear felt like very valid approaches with support from the spells. I don't know that I would go pure spells unless you maybe worked in something from one of the other elemental trees as well. There's no
Ele tá
reason
com
you can't
arma
mix and
mágica
match
já.
those if you're using a staff anyway.
Ele tá com uma
Volcano
boa
and
arma
Entangle
mágica já.
are like fairly
Ele pode
good
tá
on their own,
overlevel,
but you
com
want something
certeza.
else on top of that as like a burst skill. Obviously you can use the basic staff skills, those are okay, but you could use a 3rd gem maybe to pick up a spell from the elemental tree to round it out with a bit more immediate damage if you're going for more of a maybe to pick up a spell from the elemental tree to round it out.
What the fuck? Que é isso aqui, velho? Isso aqui já é outro talismã, né? Não é aquele que ele pegou na praia, já é outro, velho. Que deve ser o segundo. Ou é o Nick? Não, deve ser o segundo. Bom, teoricamente ele não, a gear dele não tá super, não. Vou supor que essas gear aqui nem são
With
raras.
a bit more immediate damage if you're going for more of a pure spellcaster, for example. Since those pure druid skills are pitched at being kind of like ongoing effects that keep going as you're doing something else, so you want something else to do. So after Red Veil, the next tier of gems gives access to Shockwave Totem, Rolling Magma for the Wyvern form, it's actually a Wyvern skill, and Pounce for Wolf, and Wing Blast
A gema nível 3 não tem nada de urso.
for Wyvern as well. So Wyvern gets 2 here because it's kind of first introduced at this point. You also like unlock the ability to swap to it on your talisman at this point, even
Ele
if
tá
you've
com
got
mais
the
2
original
melee.
talisman, I believe. I suspect
Aí
maybe
é
it's based on
foda.
character level. That would make sense. So this
Como é que tu sabe que ele tá com mais 2 melee? Tá não, pô.
expands your build options in quite a few ways, about 4 different directions right away. There's a lot of lines of play
Mostra. Aí é foda, mais 2 não
on the
tem como.
druid here, even right at the early game. So you
Aí
can
é
totem
foda.
with bear form.
Sim,
for
ele tá
Jagged
com mais
Directions,
2.
for
Ah,
example.
mano.
Rolling Magma plus Volcano.
Aí é foda.
As a combo there for Fire Focused Wyvern. The Magmas trigger the volcanoes. Plus Volcano. As a combo there for Fire Focused Wyvern.
Ah não, pô. Aqui ele não tá não. Tá? Tá não, chat. Aqui, porque senão ia aparecer ali na gema, ó. Fica aqui azulzinho, level. Aqui ele não tá com mais 2 ainda não, mano. Fica aqui 2 e ia aparecer tipo 4. Tá não, velho.
The Magmas trigger the volcanoes. You can incorporate Pounce
Ah,
into
sim.
wolf form, which
Não é possível, mano. Não tá mostrando ali.
gives a bunch of benefits.
Não tá não,
And
velho.
you can also grab Wing Blast for like a lightning focused melee Wyvern
Ele trocou a arma.
with its benefits. It's trigger Rolling Magma plus Volcano. As a combo there for Fire Focused Wyvern.
Oh my god, é verdade, mano. Ele tá no staff, velho. Mano, que scam! Que scammer, cara!
The Magmas trigger the volcanoes. You can incorporate Pounce into wolf
Safado!
form, which gives a bunch of benefits. And you can also grab Wing Blast for like a lightning focused melee Wyvern with its default attack. Since at this point I was really enjoying the wolf form, I grabbed Pounce, and this is possibly the best all-rounded skill in the entire druid category. It's a skill of all time, I'll tell ya. Big fan. It's a great movement skill that leaps gaps and obstacles, which is enough to use it just by itself, but it also slams and hits a large area of effect, which can be boosted with Fist of War. It marks a target on hit, and it automatically marks the highest rarity target, so it just works. You can link your own mark later on, or you can just use the built-in Predator's mark, which is honestly quite good on this skill.
Jogador de bet.
It gives the target increased damage taken. Great. It's based on the number of enemies of your enemy that it has nearby, if that makes sense. So, okay, yeah, if you and your minions are standing next to it, it takes more damage.
Ele tá usando a Ice Bite aqui, ó. Ele tá usando a Ice Bite nova. Nova não, é porque agora tem level 1, né? É, mas eu acho que sempre tinha, né?
And it also summons a wolf companion each time you trigger the mark on kill.
E ali é o minion.
Later on. So it provides its own minions to trigger Predator's marks effect anyway. So this skill does everything. Crazy. Obviously it's a must-have in wolf form, but I used it in every single build I tested on Druid. I think if you're using a talisman in your build, you're probably going to want to use this skill. A leap initiator, mark on hit is really good for any melee playstyle, and it's good to just have unless you have like another skill that you use instead. I can see you using it. It's important here, I think, that I drive home just how you aren't locked to a form as well. Like, you may know that, but it's easy to just not really think about it. Your talisman choice is only the selection for which basic attack you have.
O fato de você poder trocar esse bite no level 1 é muito bom, velho.
It's only important what you choose on your talisman if you actually plan to do some sort of combo with it, and I don't think every build will necessarily use the basic attack. Os lobinhos, não sei se tá fazendo alguma coisa não. Tem uma caveira ali tancando 3 lobinhos, já fazia uma meia hora. Some of them will because they have some pretty powerful combo effects. But for example, the Bear Forms one just generated rage, and there's other ways to do that. Rage support gem on another skill, for example. So,
olha o dano do lobinho. O lobinho não bate.
I can absolutely see not using the bear's basic attack for too long. And you'd only use the werewolf one if you were planning on doing some sort of like icicle based build, right? So you're absolutely free to leap in as a wolf and then proceed to bear slam everything, for example. And it took me a while to really fully take that in and incorporate that into my gameplay. I still catch myself thinking of each shapeshift form as this like own separate thing, even though I know it's not. But try and like remind yourself to take Druid a bit more holistically, right? It's if there's like a skill or passive bonus from one of the forms that you want to enable some combo or synergy with your build, then use it. Nothing stops you, right? The devs have given some guided and more obviously spelled out combos within each particular like shapeshift form.
Oh, minha área de efeito tá ali, ó. A área de efeito foi pra ali, né? É 12, é 10, foi nerfado. Deve ser 10 archetype,
like for example, bears combos within each particular like shapeshift form or archetype. Like for example, bears maul generating rage and then slam consuming it, right? Like these are pre-packaged items that we're given as obvious starting points, but there's plenty of room for cross synergies between forms and potentially even other weapon types too. Like I don't see why you couldn't like generate rage on a bear and then consume it in wyvern form for the big flame breath or something. Or even alternate between bear slams and human form mace slams. I'm sure there's a build there. So wolf form, which already felt really good with its high movement speed and attack speed, definitely got faster and more furious with Pounce. Overall, this playstyle is a fairly straightforward melee attacker with some room for some pretty good skill expression, I think, in how well you position and freeze and then swap to shred enemies so that you kind of
mostre mais alguma coisa aí pra nós, ZiggyD.
Fly off. I think if you are pretty good at it, you can perform, you know, get a little bit of extra juice out of it. But if you just want a Lunar Assault, freeze everything and just kill them with that, like a freeze cleave build, then you absolutely can, I think. It's not as high single target right away as the full bear form combo, unless you get like really nice shotgunning off the icicles on a large boss, for example. But freeze locks down many bosses, and I felt like I was just dismantling any bigger targets, you know. It's like by the time they go to do their first real attack, you freeze them and then they're nearly dead. So a lot of the fights were just kind of over before they began.
Pera, dá pra ver agora, dá pra ver agora, dá pra ver agora.
Well, the fights were just kind of over before they began.
Safado, mano. Tá com physical flat mais 2. Holy! Holy, bro! Bom. E crítico 11%? Bro. Esse talismã aqui deve ser o segundo, né, da área. Chama a polícia. Polícia Federal. Alô, Polícia Federal. Alô, Polícia Federal. Bem-vindo à última linha de defesa da humanidade. E não chegou a parte do templo? Calma. Ah, mas tipo assim... Mais 2 deixa ele muito forte pra ali pra onde ele tá. Principalmente pra matar os boss. Aquele dano ali tá super buffado. Ainda mais com physical flat. Mas... Valoriza as skills, né? Valoriza as skills, né? Não dá pra aumentar espaço do inventário não, maninho. Só a ascendência de titã consegue fazer isso.
I did dip my toes into the Wyvern form next to mess around with some of their skills a bit off and on. I played with Rolling Magma and Volcano as a kind of ranged Wyvern. Magma Orb bounces also trigger Volcano's projectile pulse, so it's pretty difficult, I think, to position and take full advantage of, especially if like the enemies are running at you, for example. Something like Entangle can slow enemies down to help with that, so you can throw down some Entangles.
Bagulho é bater de asa e comer mob.
Shoot out some Magma Orbs.
Come todo mundo e bate asa, mano,
It's
vai.
definitely a more difficult playstyle than what the other ones that I've covered so far offer you at this stage in the early game. This was a bit of a running theme for me with Wyvern in my play session. It's a more complicated form with some very powerful specific elements, but less straightforward
O Ziggy fez o
lines of
urso
play
tão
and
bom que a
synergies
GG vai
overall.
nerfar.
It's also the one that's probably
foda.
seen the most changes from what I
Aí é
played to
foda.
when it launches. I already know some changes that I'll mention as we go. I
Vou
will come
comer
back
o
to
chat
Wyvern a bit
todo.
more
Lá
later,
ele, irmão.
because I had my first little
Lá
temple
ele.
foray after my 6th Val sacrifice here.
This place has gone
Vamos ver a mecânica agora, vai.
Power blankets this altar.
Console.
So the League is introduced to you with a just very simple initial design. You place some basic rooms. It almost doesn't matter where you put these first ones. Later on, where you place them upgrades, but it highlights and makes it super easy to no-brain it if you want. And then you just run that small temple to clear the rooms you placed, leaving whenever you want. You don't have like a specific objective here. You can clear the rooms and you'll get like a, I believe, a portal to send you out of there once you're done with all of the rooms. But basically, you're just going in there for the actual specific rewards of each room.
Nossa, vai
And
demorar
that
pra fazer.
is like a bunch of chests and weapon racks and things that drop gear.
Vai
Or a
dropar
bunch
gear,
of
mas vai
crafting
demorar pra
benches
fazer.
that do things like improve quality, add sockets, let you
Opa.
alch, or a bunch of
Deixa eu
crafting
ver.
benches
Transforma um item mágico em raro e adiciona um mod.
that do things like improve quality, add sockets, let you alch,
É
reroll,
uma
and
Regal, então. Transforma um raro equipamento com um novo random mod. Esse daqui troca um mod ou dá um
Item.
novo extra? Deixa eu ver. Esse daqui já tem 6, então vai trocar. Vai ser tipo uma... Caos Orb.
which is really good while leveling. Regal, a magic item. Exalt, a magic rare item, and so on. So just doing like 1 or 2 of these quick little temple forays each act will give you a pretty decent chunk of gear improvement. I think I did 1 per act. You get a really good amount of items to craft too, but I
Esse altar
recommend
aí?
hanging on to any like specific
Tá.
bases you want to upgrade as you go into one of these. So, for
Esse bicho
example,
tá
your next
forte, tá?
weapon base that you need to craft.
Ah, tá
you know,
trancado
and
esse dano
crafting
todo
currency,
aí
you
que
can
ele
just go
tá...
to the temple and make it. Or maybe you like need movement speed boots, so keep a nice pair of boots in
Forte,
your
forte.
inventory to potentially craft movement
ver.
speed on. That's how
Vamos
I
ver
ended
essa
up getting
daqui.
some of my movement speed
Esse altar... O que aconteceu nesse altar aqui? Por que ele esquipou 2 mais 2 melee? Ah, foi aqui que ele pegou o melee.
boots. I've never had so much like
Com qualidade 20 ainda.
socketed and craft movement speed on. That's how I ended up getting some of. So keep a nice
Ah,
pair
ele
of
dá
boots in your
qualidade.
inventory to potentially craft movement speed on. That's how I ended
Porra, não consigo ver, velho. O altar dá 20 de
up
quality.
getting some of my movement speed boots.
Ah,
I've
20
never
de
had so
quality
much
é
like
pronto,
socketed
velho.
and quality gear while leveling in Path of Exile 2 as I have
Mas não
with this
compensa você ir
temple.
lá dentro não pra pegar. Vai demorar muito. Ah, compensa sim, vai ficar muito mais fácil, velho. Mas tipo, questão de tempo, eficiência de tempo, não compensa não.
So after my quick 5-minute temple gearing session, I quickly returned to the cemetery to absolutely embarrass Draven in wolf form. And then I do much the same on Lachlan too, which is often a decent difficulty spike for a lot of builds.
Ganha uma Regal, mais Exalted, mais 20% free, e aí tu troca de arma no próximo mapa.
The other set of Wyvern starter abilities is melee with Wing Blast and Wyvern's default attack Rend. So Wing Blast is a bit like Spear's disengage skill. It's a backwards leap that can get you out of harm's way and do some other utility things.
Mas, tipo,
But
compensa,
in this
compensa
case,
fazer,
it
mano.
also
Mas,
has a
tipo,
large
pra
AoE that stuns
questão de
primed for
tempo, não
stunned
deve
enemies
compensar, não.
and triggers an extra
tempo é muito grande.
explosion for some nice kind of like AoE clear on those stunned enemies.
Todo mundo
It
ignora
also
o
generates
Wisp.
charges on stunning enemies, power charges with a surpassing chance, it's called. You can scale it past 100% for more charges, potentially, for example. That's how that works. And one change that GGG has already told me about here with the Wyvern is that this skill has been buffed a bit by granting 3 charges now on
mata o
stunning unique
bicho
enemies, which is good, because I felt
pra
like
marca
it
lá,
was difficult to actually use the power
e aí
charge
nasce
stuff in
lobo.
boss fights, but having 3 charges means you can get like 15 seconds
Cara, ele tá
plus
muito forte
in
aqui,
power attacks
velho.
or something. You can like chain
Ele
it
tá
through the
muito
rest of the boss
forte,
fight.
velho.
So I could see you kind of
Ele tá
just getting
amassando com
one
hit.
stun and then that carrying you through the rest of the boss fight as you expend all of your charges. So that does sound like a nice improvement. So the Rend basic attacks can spend a power charge if you aren't currently buffed to give you a buff with empowered lightning attacks. It gives that skill a much bigger AoE and adds lightning damage. And it does a few other things with a few other skills too. It actually turns it from like a very basic little melee attack into like a pretty hefty, big cleaving skill that does quite a lot of damage. Empowered Rend, it is slow.
Opa! Surpasse? O que é surpasse? Deixa eu ver. 10% de surpasse em chance de ganhar um power charge quando você stuna.
But it is big and chunky and really satisfying, and I'm really hoping that there's some potential for like melee Rend
103 de
builds that
ataque
maintain
damage
empowerment with
effectives.
that, because it felt really good when I was
103 é
clearing
bem
all
baixo, na
packs
real.
with it. Wyvern's early game was definitely the hardest to get the hang of all of the
A
kind of
combação do
types
Weaver é
here.
muita coisa, não
At least when you
curti.
try to stay purely in Wyvern form, because again, just like you can just use something like Wing Blast alone for a melee escapes skill and then like play your bear build, right? There's no reason you have to kind of like force yourself to stay in any one form if like overall it doesn't feel like it's paying off for you. Still kind of wrapping my head around that. I did also kind of take Wyvern through one of the most difficult areas in the early game here, but
Não, agora esse aqui ficou bem
Once I
ruim,
got
né? Agora que ele botou Scattershot ficou menos
I
ruim,
did also
né?
kind of take Wyvern through one of the most difficult areas in the
Mas
early
ainda é
game here,
ruim.
but
Mas
once I
parar
got
pra
through
jogar isso
there,
toda hora,
the
velho.
first Spirit Gem gave me options of Savage Fury, which is basically a Druid-like Berserk buff that drains your health for a short boost to speed and damage. It looks
Ó,
very
aplicou
strong for
choque,
bossing,
aplicou
and
choque,
it's probably
aplicou choque.
not too hard to manage that life loss as long as you got like a floss charge or something. Probably well worth it, and I expect we'll see some use. Anything that boosts your damage and speed for a duration
Mano,
is usually
mas eu vou ser sincero com vocês, velho.
worth it, and I
Porra, desse dragão tá bonito, né,
like to
velho?
manage boost to
Tá bonito, é bem feito, mano. Você tá doido, parece que saiu da caverna. Larga a tixa.
speed and damage. It looks very strong for bossing, and it's probably not too hard to
Vai postar a build de level no guerreiro. Vou sim, Tiandão. Vou sim, já tá na mão do editor, tá na mão do Ferbinho agora.
manage that life loss as long as you got like a floss charge or something.
Tudo que eu
Probably well
queria,
worth it, and I
essa sorte de
expect we'll
pegar
see some
mais
use.
2
Anything
e ter
that boosts
azul.
your damage and speed.
Isso aqui é uma aura, né? Buff 30 de Spirit. Ganha 1 de fúria no ataque. Não mais que uma vez por uso da skill. Máximo de 20 de fúria. O buff duration é 1 segundo por fúria. Então o máximo é 20 segundos. Dá 21% more damage e 32 de attack speed. E 16% de movement speed por 20 segundos. Mas causa você a perder 3% da máxima vida, que vai resultar no tempo máximo de 60% da vida máxima, se você usar full. Não mais que uma vez por uso da skill. Não é rage, isso daqui é fúria, é outra parada. Não mais que uma vez por uso da skill, meu Deus. Eu tenho que dar 20 skills, usar a skill 20 vezes para acumular a fúria máxima disso, para poder usar quando eu quiser. Ah, justo. Justo. Você vai usar em, sei lá, mob raro. Ah, é um bom buff, mano.
For a duration is usually a popular choice. I didn't get to chest it in this run though, as Spirit Gems are pretty hard to get hold of in the campaign.
1% do... Isso daqui já existe, né? É, isso aqui já existe.
And I instead went for Briar Patch. So this buff stores some melee physical damage.
Peraí, não vi as outras. Deixa eu ver o que tem
I
mais ali
instead
embaixo.
went for Briar Patch.
Trinity. Barkskin tá ali, velho. Não dá pra gente ver. Wolf Fact, Feral Invocation, Eternal Rage. Mano, eu quero ver aqueles ali,
Run
velho.
though, as spirit gems are pretty hard to get hold of in the campaign, and I instead went for Briar Patch. So this buff stores some melee physical damage that you deal to enemies.
Mas pra boss, esse não existe, não? Existe, mano. Depende do boss, na verdade. Se for o Chest, por exemplo, é só você guardar a fúria. Se for o Arbiter, por exemplo, aí você mamou.
To automatically place a
Ah,
thorny
dá pra você
ground
usar 20
when you
skill no
next
boss.
cast a spell. So if you put a volcano down, it'll be surrounded by thorny ground, or if
Dependendo se você
you
estiver
cast like a
atacando
lightning strike
rápido,
or something, it'll
lobo
be
vai
thorny ground
bater
as well.
20 vezes
It's
rapidinho.
got a built-in delay, but it's super easy to charge up with just like a single pounce on enemies, for example. It's pretty low impact overall, though I was thinking that there's probably some good utility supports that can go on there later, especially for plant druid styles. Between Thorny Ground, Volcano, Entangle, and Totem at this point, we have a lot of persistent effects we can dump out before engaging in melee, and they all scale fine together at this point in the game, right? Like, so there's no real reason to just not go ham and use everything. It's just like throw everything in the kitchen sink at the boss and then go in and bear slam them. You know, you got time often while most bosses are doing some sort of monologue to like pre-place like 4 Entangles, 2 Volcanoes, a Totem, and automatically place down the other Thorny Ground. So you're absolutely going to go that route.
Mano,
The
pro
other
nível
notable
de
spirit
poder
gem
que ele
choice that I
tá,
passed up earlier was Herald of Ice, and I wasn't able to get my hands on one for the rest of the 3-act session, which is something I wanted to note because it's a bit of a shame because I played it and loved a lot of the wolf form, but I never really felt like I got the full picture of what it plays like to clear as an ice wolf. Because it feels pretty good, but it was missing a bit of AoE clear. That's the thing it probably struggled with the most.
é, ele tá falando
And not
aqui
having Herald of Ice was
que o
like obviously
lobo-
the missing piece.
que ele jogou de lobo a maior parte do tempo, mas que tava faltando, tipo, clear de AoE e tal, tá ligado?
Piece of that puzzle. So just keep that in mind as you watch that
Dá
wolf
pra meter
gameplay in the
co-op com
future.
esse clear do urso? Dá,
And just
ué.
mentally add some of your own ice
Tem nada que não vai
explosions to
fazer,
that
guys.
gameplay, just to kind of imagine how your werewolf leveling might go. It's already really satisfying, like doing the icicle
Cara, ele
explosions
meteu
and
totem
freezing
do
things
nada,
and
tá
watching them
ligado?
shatter. I can
Meteu
only imagine
totem do
with
lado
Herald
do
of Ice
urso
how
do
satisfying
nada.
that's going to be. If I go wolf, I'll definitely grab Herald of Ice. For bear, I'd probably grab that Savage Fury. And Briar Patch if I level like a nature style druid, maybe, I don't know. Activating it with Pounce, maybe. I think that's more of a specific build thing. It's nice, but definitely not as impactful as other spirit gem choices.
Ô, louco, tá summonando totem na forma de urso. Poxa, ele summona totem na forma de urso?
Gem choices.
Tá, filho? Tá summonando totem na forma de urso, mano.
Late Act 1, you start to get your first weapon set passives.
Ô,
And unlike Late Act 1, you start to get your first weapon set passives. And unlike Late Act 1, you start to get your first weapon set passives. And
meu Deus!
Late Act 1, you start to get your first weapon set passives.
Era effect duration mesmo, no final das contas.
And unlike leveling other
Critical while shapeshifted. Skill speed while shapeshifted. Ah, não, mano. 8% de skill speed while shapeshifted. Será que esse é o único node que tá pra cá? De shapeshift? Do nada tem um vulcão, planta, totem, 2 lubinhos seguindo o urso. Tava decidido e de Hunters, agora tô com vontade de jogar com isso.
Bem-vindo à última linha de defesa da humanidade.
Esse damage tá broken, não? Tem que levar em consideração que ele tá usando mais 2 na skill, mano. Mais 2 na skill faz muita diferença pra um boneco que bate com skill. O dano dele deve estar uns, sei lá, 30% maior do que 90% vai estar. Sem contar o overlevel. Ele tá level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9... Não, ele não tá overlevel não, até. Overlevel ele não tá não. Ele tá no level certo da área ali. 11 mais ou menos.
characters, I think you really want to start taking
Increase de damage. Mano, essa parte da trilha aqui tá boa, tá? Não tá tão ruim, não. Achei que ia ser ruim por começar de druida, mas parece que essa parte da trilha tá boa. A gente tem 8 de ataque, a gente tem a área de efeito, a gente tem grease de damage com life regen, a gente tem skill speed. É uma boa área de começar, tá?
Advantage of these right away if you're going spells and shapeshift combo.
Mais de 8%, né? Porque tem um node pequeno. E skill speed, será que quanto que é skill speed? Mano, bom, velho.
Which I absolutely think you should. It's super fun. And
Ele ali em
these
cima
right
era o quê?
away if you're going spells and shapeshift combo.
Strength
Which
int, né, que vocês tinham falado. Não, era grease de damage também. Aquele pequenininho ali também é grease de damage. Ah.
Absolutely think you should. It's super fun. So it's pretty simple initially to start doing this. If you've never messed with the weapon set trees, it only really gets confusing when you try to do respecking typically. That's when you kind of got to wrap your
8 de grease de damage. Quanto será de damage aquele grande ali? 15? Vou voltar porque ele mostrou.
hands. It only
Vou botar na velocidade pouca aqui pra gente não ficar o dia inteiro. Pera aí. Velocidade, ponto 25.
really gets confusing.
$16? $16 tua cabeça. Critical 20. Quase. 20, se tu levar em consideração que é área damage e damage dá 20, mais critical bonus, que não é inútil, né? É bastante dano nesse node aqui, tá? Forte, tá? Forte começar aqui em cima.
And around just how it works. But initially you can basically just kind of like throw any duration or clearly spell-oriented clusters on the staff weapon set and any shapeshift or
A Tri saiu no Mobalytics? Saiu não.
Bem-vindo à última linha de defesa
Saiu?
da humanidade.
Se saiu, vocês linka. Deixa eu upar ele de vazar aí, se não vazar a Tri.
survivability nodes or melee damage stuff on the talisman set. I spent and tinkered with these a lot as I went, and it felt like a pretty nice payoff for it. There's like quite a lot of it going on that you can cherry pick between in the druid area of the tree. It makes sense. I think passive tree support is like super
A
important
Tri saiu no chat da UOL. Se saiu, é pago porque aqui tá antiga ainda.
for this sort of like hybrid playstyle. And it's good that that kicks into gear pretty
Saiu não,
early on
saiu
if
não.
you want it. For Executioner, I decided to revisit the Bear Slams since they performed pretty well early on. I was keen to see how they
Pior
were
que tem mesmo.
holding up at this point.
Deixa eu ver. Tem o que? Vocês estão trolando? Isso aqui é a Tri antiga. Baitada.
I had the totem now to add in, and that triggers the jagged ground from the empowered slams to create another explosion for some more bonus combo damage.
Salve, Lira.
You have much to answer for. You have much to answer for. The hand that held the rope lies still.
And yeah, their form is pretty amazing on bosses.
Ó, botou rápido de ataque aonde que eu quero ver?
And overall, pretty well rounded.
No mall. O mall dele tá com rápido de ataque e Ice Bite. Não sei de onde
It
que ele
felt like
botou
the
isso.
most well-rounded of them, like powerful single target, decent AoE clear, maybe a little bit slower, offset by just switching into wolf form.
Mano, pensa nisso,
nice.
chat. Pensa nisso. Se eu pego ataque damage, área damage... Deixa eu ver uma coisa. Qual que é o bagulho do gelo? Esse aqui? Lunar Assault? AOE, melee e ataque. Olha isso, chat. Olha a minha brilhante ideia. AOE, melee e ataque é a mesma coisa que a gente bota no slam do urso. Significa que eu posso virar lobo pra procar o buff da Ice Bite, mano. E ganhar free 35% damage antes de começar a estompar o mapa todo.
Nice defenses too. It's pretty nice. And you know, you can just use that pounce to form shift into wolf and start sprinting when you move between packs. There's no reason why
A duração é pequena, né?
when you
A
can
duração é quanto?
instantly
5
shapeshift into a
segundos?
wolf whenever you want. I was really vibing the hybrid wolf bear and human spells. It feels like you get to cherry pick the best parts of every part of these kind of 3 forms.
Pra você
And
ver
just
como
add
é
them
ser
together to
escamado.
create a super build. Feels like cheating a little bit. Adding rage and rapid attacks to maul makes it really quick to generate rage for slams as well, with 3 mauls giving you enough for like 2 slams back to back. And when you start double and triple volcano slamming bosses,
Caralho. Porra. Tava batendo aqui, tá, pai? Não sei como é que tava o setup dele aqui de item e tal, mas tava batendo, mano.
oh yeah, so good. Poor Candlemass and indeed poor Geonor. Guy really got outclassed on this whole shape-shifting trope, even after selling his soul for it, right?
Mano. Olha a velocidade que ele buildou essa rage aqui, velho. Isso daqui é 30% more. Vamos ignorar o set dele aqui por um momento. Vamos ignorar o set dele aqui por um momento. Isso aqui é 30% more damage. Eu acho que não tem nada que você consegue 30% more damage nessa altura do jogo aqui. Ah, talvez Conk Effect.
So good.
Ele buildou tudo com 3 hits do
Poor
mal, velho.
Candlemass and indeed poor Geonor. Guy really got outclassed on this whole
Oh.
shape-shifting trope, even after selling his soul
1,
for
2,
it, right?
3. 30% de
So anyway, I
novo.
don't know if you can hear in the background, but I have a newborn baby and our family is all sick right now. So I'll end part 1 of this preview here and optimistically hope to be able to get part 2 out before launch if I can. I'll try. Forgive me in
Meio
advance if it's a bit later or if I can't make it. At times like this, I think it's best to just celebrate the small wins. Like, you know, making a part 1 preview and getting it published. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that it helps a few of you see a bit more of the Druids potentially, you know, the fun that it has to offer you if you're a bit unsure based on that initial reveal. I feel like Druid's getting a little bit of a raw deal in the reactions, so maybe do my part just to give you a little bit more of a realistic impression as to what it looks like. Anyway, folks, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD.
Mas ele nem usou a skill que eu queria ver. Que faz correr. Poggers. Poggers, chat.